If you're like me, you might be asking this June, and every June, what in the heaven happened to two consenting adults in the privacy of their own bedroom, and how did it turn into this? Like most things that leave you coming away scratching your head and bewildered, you should know there is a purposeful, overt agenda that has been taking place in America to try to make these kind of things more and more acceptable. And you need to know about it. That's why we're talking about it today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Now, I want you to stick around for the end of the show today because I have a very special clip and announcement that will deal with the future of Indie Thinker and the way that we're expanding things here, and you won't want to miss it because hopefully it's pretty funny. But beyond that, I think that it's important because it is also relevant to the topic of conversation today. And today we're going to be talking about how the gay rights movement hijacked the civil rights movement. Now, this is fully pronounced in something that just took place in Florida. A federal judge struck down a law banning the bodily mutilation of children, talking about cross-sex experimental hormones that weaken your bones and give you heart issues and thin your hair, and then also the obvious, more problematic cutting off of body parts of children that are barely old enough to tell you whether they want juice or milk. Now, a judge, in a decision as he was striking down this ban on transgender surgeries and cross-sex hormones for children, he said this: "In time, discrimination against transgender individuals will diminish, just as racism and misogyny have diminished." He continued, "To paraphrase a civil rights advocate from an earlier time, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Now, already you might be asking yourself, how in the world is it a civil rights issue to butcher and mutilate small children who are not of the age of consent? In many states, you still can't get tattoos or even get kids to have their ears pierced to a certain age, but there is no age limit on the castration and mutilation of children. So obviously, something is going on here, especially when you take into account the fact that the civil rights movement was based upon the color of a person's skin, and the gay rights movement is based upon sexual preference, two very different things. For instance, skin color is immutable, but who you have sex with is definitely not immutable. Now, gay activists have been making the claim for ages now that there's a gay gene and there's a gay brain, and I was born this way and I can't do anything about it. But of course, that flies in the face of everything we know about biology, because there is actually no science around any of those talking points. And this goes to the second thing. I mean, we can purely look observationally at the world around us and see that homosexuality is not the natural way in which human beings are supposed to interact with each other. I hate to be graphic with you, but I'm essentially talking about you do not put things in the exit hole.
How about no, Scott?
And the third thing is this: skin color isn't immoral. Discrimination based upon skin color is sinful because you are judging somebody based upon an immutable biological fact. However, the willful decision to engage in a non-procreative act of pure hedonic pleasure that all common sense biology tells you is wrong surely is something that is sinful. And if it isn't, then how do we know? Let me just pose it to you this way. We know that heterosexual sex at least is not purely about the pursuit of pleasure because it has the possibility of procreation. As Thomas Aquinas told us, that marriage and the union between a man and a woman is purposefully, in principle, about the furtherance of the rearing of children and the education of children. And of course, we all know the best way to raise a child, past, present, and future, is a biological mother and father in a home raising that child. In other words, if there is an intrinsic good that comes out of the fact of the pursuit of pleasure, then we can say that there is more to this than pleasure. But we cannot say that about homosexuality because there is not that kind of objective moral good for society that comes out of those unions. So since all the indications point to the fact that homosexuality is a willful decision against God's holy order and His word, homosexuality is sinful, and that's why Scripture is so clear on the matter. And at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, Rosa Parks would even say to this individual trying to get on the bus, take those booty shorts to the back, son. But Voddie Baucham just wrote a book on this very issue, and I think it's important to talk about. And the book title is It's Not Like Being Black. Great title, by the way. And in it, he shows how the gay rights movement hijacked the civil rights movement. Now, Voddie's book is based upon a 2012 article that he wrote in which he said gay is not the new black. And then a follow-up article on Desiring God where he asked the question, is gay now the new black? And in that latter article, he says this: the homosexual community has latched on to that approach and has identified itself as a constituency deserving of our attention and pity. They did so intentionally using the AIDS crisis. The direct result is they now have achieved a one-to-one correlation that we are finding it very hard to move away from. Now, I think that succinctly wraps up what Voddie is after in his book, It's Not Like Being Black. And essentially, he's alluding to something he writes about in the book that I think is important for all of us to know. And in the book, he addresses a 1990s book called After the Ball: How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s by Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen. And if you're a keen observer, you already picked up on the gay agenda at work in the title of the book. See, the hatred of gays needs to be conquered. So somehow they want to argue that, see, you're a homophobe if you disagree with me, and you fear gay people, like claustrophobia, you're a homophobe. Somehow you think if you get around gay people, you'll start talking with a lisp, and then all of a sudden you'll be naked, parading down the streets in June in front of small children. And if you disagree with the gay lifestyle, you obviously are steeped in hatred and bigotry. Now shut up and let me send drag queens into your school so we can prime the pump for the conversation about chopping off their body parts. All of this while they complain about Bibles being in schools and prayers being in schools. So in this Orwellian book that has now become kind of the handbook for the gay agenda in America, it argues a couple of things. And Voddie talks about it in his book. First and foremost, it talks about the tactic of desensitization, and that essentially, as Kirk and Madsen wrote, is the continuous flood of gay-related advertising presented in the least offensive fashion possible. If straights can't shut off the shower, they may at least eventually get used to being wet. I mean, obviously incredibly cynical, and this means an intentional effort to normalize homosexuality. Now, you might ask yourself, how has this happened? Well, every single June, seeing every corporate label with pride colors on it, or maybe Oreo commercials about a young Asian boy coming out to his grandmother, a cookie commercial. This is how some of that has taken place. And as you can see, this was written in the early 90s and already has become almost a historical fact in the present. Now, the second tactic that these men talk about in order to connect the civil rights movement to the gay agenda is to jam. And jamming is not something from Parks and Rec.
Self-jam. We got jammed.
Rather, it refers to the public smearing of Christians, traditionalists, or anyone who opposes the gay agenda. Kirk and Madsen wrote this: jam homo hatred. In other words, they mean disagreement with homosexual behaviors. By liking it to Nazi horror, associate all who oppose homosexuality with images of Klansmen demanding that gays be slaughtered, hysterical backwoods preachers, menacing punks, and a tour of Nazi concentration camps where homosexuals were tortured and gassed. I talk about this often on the show. In other words, what they mean is when you don't have God in the picture, you don't necessarily need God, but you do need a devil. So you're going to have to paint a bad guy. And of course, the easiest way to do that is to call somebody a Nazi if they disagree with you. Now go on social media and you will see this in spades. Now the final tactic is conversion. And conversion, according to Kirk and Madsen, is you want to manipulate the average American emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of propaganda fed to the nation via the media. In the early stages of any campaign to reach straight America, the masses should not be shocked and repelled by premature exposure to homosexual behavior itself. Instead, the imagery of sex should be downplayed and gay rights should be reduced to abstract questions as much as possible. Essentially what Kirk and Madsen are arguing here is a kind of Mott and Bailey tactic. What you want to do is you want to expose society to the most extreme aspects of the gay movement. You want to have drag queen story hour, you want small children at burlesque shows shoving dollar bills down the, the brassiere of large fat men who are dressed as women. You want that kind of stuff, and then you want to march kids into gender clinics and tell them that they can chop off their body parts, and that if you disagree with that somehow you're a hateful bigot. You expose them to that extreme sexual material so that then the gay agenda seems quite tepid and very normal in contrast to these extreme things. And then if anybody has anything to say about that, retreat back to the Bailey and say, well, what's wrong with two consenting adults loving each other in the privacy of their own bedroom after all? So in other words, they want to make wedge issues the norm, while they continue to push a radical gay agenda. And this is probably most pronounced in the way that the media creates martyrs for this agenda. It's very similar to what happened with Black Lives Matter and Michael Brown, but in this case, I think a kind of perfect example is Matthew Shepard, because Matthew Shepard was immediately made an icon, a face of the gay rights movement, and we were told that Matthew Shepard was killed because he was gay, and he was killed in a brutal way. And gay activists didn't care about the facts of the case. They just wanted to look at the conclusion and then convince people with the help of the media that this is what happens to gay people in America. Of course, we know that gay people in America are a protected class and are told everywhere to be celebrated and told everywhere that reality must conform to their desires rather than the truth, and therefore you must shout their pronouns at the top of your lungs if they yell at you loud enough.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
Anybody who knows the facts of the case knows that actually Matthew Shepard's death had absolutely nothing to do with an attack on homosexuals or the fact that Matthew Shepard himself was a homosexual. In fact, one of the people that was responsible for killing Matthew Shepard was himself a sexual partner of Matthew. And we all know now that the case was related more to the fact that Matthew was a dealer in meth than the fact that he was gay. Matthew simply was used as a martyr because he was convenient for the cause. Now, I understand there's going to be people who will argue, well, the death of anybody is tragic. And of course that's true, but it's not tragic in the same way. It's tragic that Matthew decided to live his life the way that he did because in the pursuit of that lifestyle, it put him in very dangerous situations. So it's not tragic like childhood cancer. It's more tragic like it's really sad that people are living their life this way. And it's also sad, by the way, that people would exploit the death of Matthew Shepard to push their agenda. But of course, that agenda is reliant upon a kind of weaponized emotional blackmail that the gay agenda has been very successful at using in order to attach their movement to the civil rights movement and to make those two things similar. And by the way, there is one final similarity that I think is important. As you can already tell from things that I read from the book, they were interested in infiltrating the church and trying to castigate Christians, especially because they knew that Christians would be the most vocal opponents of this agenda. Even in the book, they said that they needed to infiltrate the Presbyterian church because they feel like those people will be greater allies. But apparently they didn't see the Methodists coming because, man, are they allies.
What if God worships me?
As crazy as all of this sounds, it worked. We're now living in the reality of the book After the Ball, and Voddie is correct. It's not like being black, but we still think it is. The gay rights movement was able to hitch its wagon to the civil rights movement, and I'll argue through the same way that the civil rights movement was able to be so effective in America. See, the civil rights movement utilized Christian teaching to move people toward a more moral way of living. In fact, you will understand this most pronounced if you look at and research the Second Great Awakening, which was a Christian movement where, largely led by white pastors, but black pastors as well, white ministers were saying slavery must be abolished. If it weren't for Christians preaching against slavery, abolition probably never would have happened in America. And the gay movement used this same playbook for their agenda. They weaponized the same empathy and weaponized the same love that the Bible preaches about in order to try to twist people's understanding about what love actually is. And so now when they say love, what they actually mean is sodomy. Now even the vast majority of Christians will tell you that homosexuality is a love the sinner and hate the sin issue. And this has nothing to do with that. It has to do with a purposeful propaganda made successful because the people in the majority stayed silent when they should have refused. And now, while we're figuring out how to love the gay community and arguing amongst ourselves whether we should be welcoming and affirming, a man can't even practice the freedom of association at his own bake shop without decades-long legal battles from gay activists forcing him almost out of business. And whenever Christians disagree, they're called Nazis, Christian nationalists, and bigots from the most tolerant and supposedly loving people on the planet.
Ironic.
Right now, the birth rate is in catastrophic decline. Gay surrogacy is on the rise. Does that sound like a winning recipe for the destruction of our society? If you think yes, then you might want to reconsider the approach that Christians have had toward the gay agenda in America. Listen, let me argue this way. The church is the only institution that has such purposeful pressure on it to be quiet. Now, why is that? And we don't do this to Hollywood. They can be as perfectly political as they want. They can give millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood. The academic world isn't told not to be political. Of course it's political. I mean, look at the teachers union. The political is, of course, political. The corporate world is political. And, of course, the media is political. They are not unbiased and totally objective. Those days are long gone, and nobody believes that they are anymore. There's a bias in all of it. But of course, they're allowed to do it because that's them. But when it comes to Christians, no, just preach the gospel. Don't be political. Just love people. And in other words, go to your churches and be quiet. But no, thank you. We're not going to do that. And the reason I say that is because we actually tried it. Christians for the longest time have been the majority and utterly quiet about the ways in which we are supposed to organize our society around these Christian virtues and principles. And we've seen what you guys do when you're left unattended, so no thank you. We're going to enter back into the public square, and we're going to use our voice once again to fight back against these kind of agendas. So if you don't like men and women's sports, the sexual exploitation of children, or the extinction of the human race, it might be time to speak up. And here at Indie Thinker, we are doing exactly that. In fact, we're doing it in, I think, hopefully a way that will bring some levity to the conversation. We're entering into some fact-based comedy, some satire that we'll be launching very soon in the near future at Indie Thinker. I believe this will turn into a separate show, another podcast, perhaps with another personality, but for now, we just kind of want to tease what we're going to be doing in the future. So for your enjoyment, here is a parody of the NBC documentary that just came out this month, Queer Planet.
Gay penguins, bisexual lions, sex-changing clownfish.
This is a queer planet.
From the makers of Queer Planet comes a new groundbreaking documentary, Murderous Planet.
If you thought the sex life of animals was admirable, you should see the diet.
Lions, tigers, and bears. No matter where you turn in the animal kingdom, you'll find behavior that humans should embrace.
I believe in being inclusive of all food pyramids.
I like to say, don't judge others, eat them.
The idea that life is sacred is for bigots, but nature is calling us to follow our appetite, wherever it leads.
We should all learn from the animal kingdom and be accepting of all ways of life.
Indigenous people groups, the people that ate Joe Biden's uncle, Hannibal Lecter. I mean, it can't be all that bad eating people.
When you look around our planet, it's clear. Morals and ethics are way out of style.
Just think of all the hunger problems we could solve if we started eating each other.
Let's be honest. We'd all feel better ripping the heads off of our enemies. Honey, bring me some barbecue sauce.
If you believe as I do, it's time for a force in society to start pushing us toward common sense once again, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because you don't want to miss all that we'll be doing in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Most importantly, go with God.